maybe for something new, maybe itching for this discussion that we're going to have tonight and next week, I can go ahead and promise you this. We're not going to finish our discussion tonight. Based upon what we talked about last week, based upon the study and the contemplation, prayer, the discussions I've had with other people, we're not going to finish this week. So we're actually going to finish our class with the study of human life. We talked about that last week. What is human life? How do we define it? What is its value? Do humans have rights? So defining what or who is human, how is that categorized? And then do those people actually have rights to their life, and do we have a right to take that life? Do we have a right to take that life? And that's what we looked at last week, and we got to some subjects that were some that we would all agree on, some that were a little touch and go. So, but I can assure you that we're going to handle this with the utmost respect and try and get through this and find some answers. But we're going to start tonight with the discussion of eugenics. We talked about that last week. We looked at some things like capital punishment, eugenics, abortion, termination of life support, things like that. But tonight we're going to begin with this as eugenics, and we're not going to spend much time on it. I wanted to bring this out because this is where we're heading as a society. This is where we're heading as a culture, and how we view life, and how we can take life almost into our own hands now. This study here is contained with many different areas of work, but just to give it some consideration here, it was a movement or a project basically where you can take genetic information, take an embryo, and basically do whatever you want to with it. You can test it for abnormalities, you can tweak it and add things here and take things out here to basically make your own perfect specimen. That's what we're doing now, making the perfect child. You can actually choose what gender you want your child to be through this project now. A lot of same-sex couples are starting to do that, is they want their child to be a certain gender. So they go through all of these different embryos, and they can basically create this or tweak this to where they can get what they want out of it. But there's a lot of other testing and stuff that goes into it. Specifically, one that I was Leanne and I, and many of you in here that have recently have had kids that you've been faced with, specifically dealing with abnormalities, is the fact that we can take a blood test. The pregnant woman can take a blood test, and that test can tell you whether or what your chances are, basically. What your chances are of your child having a physical or mental disability, an abnormality, we'll call it. I don't view those people as abnormal, but that's what we would call it, as an abnormality. And upon that knowledge, you can decide whether you want to keep or terminate that child. I thought that was the most absurd thing I'd ever heard. I would like to know that in preparation, obviously. Now, having that knowledge for me, as a control freak as I am, I would like to know that so I could prepare myself for that. But that is only one of the reasons that this kind of testing and genetic creation is being used. One other reason this is being used is there are people harvesting embryos, taking a great deal of embryos and testing them to see which one, basically trying to create a perfect specimen that might be the most closely identical with a child that a family already has that is physically, terminally ill, and birthing that child, having in vitro fertilization, birthing that child for the only purpose of harvesting blood, bone marrow, organs, whatever it is, to allow this other child to survive. So we're having kids basically to kill them so that we can have another kid survive. There's a lot of that happening. That is one of the purposes of eugenics. So to test for abnormalities, to terminate that if you choose not to go through with it, and creating specimens that are to your liking. You can try and go way down deep into this. For you to look into this, it's mind-boggling to see all of the different things you can do with this project. So I'm not going to get into all that, but these are some of the purposes for this movement, this project. And to me, it begs the question of, do we really value human life, and do we really value and trust in the process of God? I can say it would have not shattered me, but it would have shaken me to learn that I was going to have a child that was going to be disabled in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Because in some ways, I can just go ahead and attest to you that I'm not the strongest person emotionally in the world, and I don't know how I would have handled it. But that person is still human, and that person would have still been my child, and I would have loved them and cared for them and raised them in the same way that I raised my daughter now. But the way that society now is starting to look at this is it's almost like we're not just playing God, we're basically embracing the view of Hitler. Let's create the perfect race. Let's get rid of abnormalities, and let's create the perfect race. Let's have the kind of gender we want and the number of the gender that we want. Let's get rid of all these disabilities and abnormalities, and let's just do away with it. If God chooses to give us a disabled child, that child is still a blessing. That child is still a blessing from God and a creation of God. And it should be viewed in that light. And many of us, of society and the world, are choosing not to see it, that way. So it's not the fact I'm saying we should just, that we would want we would choose to have a child with those types of disabilities, but does it give me the right to terminate that life if they do? This is just where we're going with this. In my study and contemplation of this, I had some people in mind scanning the room here. Okay. Basically, what society says is that these people are better off not living. The world may be better off. Their parents maybe feel that they're better off because it is a lifetime commitment at that point with certain disabilities. And so some society says that these kids are better off not living. So terminating that embryo, terminating that fetus, that pregnancy, that baby, is the best route to go. So here's my question to get personal. Would we be better off in the world personally not being able to have known Adam or Rice? Would we be better off in this world not having known those people because of their disabilities and them being born, as the world would say, abnormal? I say absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yes, sir. What?
Would you view as better off?
Yes.
I'd be so much better off financially if I didn't have any of my kids.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right about that.
They're all, healthy and normal and no
Yeah.
disabilities of any kind.
Right.
I mean, I'd be so much better off.
Oh, yeah.
Emily starts college this fall. It's like, it's going to be a huge hit.
Yeah.
Think how much better off I'd be. Ed knows about it. He's put 3 through here.
Yeah.
And yet, I would not give them up.
Right.
And it all depends on the perspective. The perspective that you're talking about is people's convenience.
Yes, it's convenience. Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right. It's convenience. Just to go to Tanya over here, she and I had this conversation last week.
What do you determine your level of disability too?
Yeah.
Ever since we've known about Rice, it's been a spectrum of he could be something that's so severe he can't even speak, or something so mild that you would have never even picked it out.
Right.
And there's everything in between.
Right.
So how do you decide which level is
Right.
unacceptable and which one's okay?
Yeah.
Because there are people on the Asperger spectrum right now that are brilliant geniuses who have given society amazing things,
Yes.
and they're on the spectrum.
Right.
So where do you draw that line on
Right.
what's acceptable and not?
Right. And inside that testing, we don't know that spectrum. We don't know where they're going to land in there. We just know there's a possibility. These children could end up not having anything at all, but there's a possibility of that. And so we choose to say, we're not going to go through with this, when it could not happen at all.
We were told, Rice, when he went to this one-year doctor appointment and the doctor saw him and started all the therapies, 4 years later, 6 years later, when we were moving here and getting his paperwork, she told us when we walked out the door, she told her colleagues he'd be a vegetable. He would
Wow.
never progressed past the point that she saw him, and she was floored and amazed and used him in illustrations all the time on what the power of the brain is if you train it and work with it. He struggles. It's hard. Will he ever live on his own? I don't know. Probably not, but we don't live any of it.
Yes. Yeah, you're exactly right. I'll just attest to something really quick, and I'll get to you. Knowing some people like this in my life, there was one individual, one child that Leanne and I had the privilege of knowing at West Milton. His name is Peyton. Cerebral palsy and really, 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 really bad off, confined to a wheelchair, cannot do anything for himself. That young man taught me more about worship than anybody in my life ever has. Because that boy right there, when you would start singing in worship, that boy right there would belt every single note there was to belt. It didn't sound in our musically inclined ears, it wouldn't sound the best, but man, he gave it everything he had. And I rejoiced in the fact that somebody like that could keep me so humble and to teach me something in my life when sometimes we look at this and we think there's nothing we can learn or benefit from in these people's lives. You had something to say.
I got two.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know if anybody's familiar with the male bubble in China, but they've been aborting females for years due to the limitations of children, and they want males to pass on the names of them, and you have this huge male bubble in China because they don't have enough wives and they're angry, and they've all been in the military. But that society has been doing picking and choosing longer than any other society. In our society, I kind of really don't know where you're going with tonight's lesson, but
Getting there. I'm getting there.
Sheree and I were close friends with some really young members of the church. I'm in Hawaii, I live in Hawaii. And when her child was weeks embryo old, they told her that child would be born with Cyclops. Wow. He is Hudson's age now. And he is missing part of his brain, but nobody would know it at all. He takes medication for whatever portion of what that portion of the brain is missing would produce. But other than that, he's a very smart, happy, healthy child. She, and he, for that matter, never considered aborting that child. And they knew, I think they knew that it was going to have this abnormality before it was old enough to know the sex of it. So within members of the church, I don't think there's a lot of people that pick and choose
Right.
based off that information. But
Right.
they had that information.
Right.
It enabled them to have the best of care going throughout the pregnancy and they were ready when the baby was born.
Right.
And he had advanced doctors lined up that, like I said, if we had a 12-year-old boy standing here, you would not know there was a thing wrong with him due to the advanced techniques that you know from
No, that's great. Which is leading me to where we're going with this is basically last week's class was, and this week is this idea of human life and the fact that those two individuals never saw this boy as anything but a God-given blessing as a human person, somebody that was going to bless their life regardless of what was going to happen to him. And yeah, I agree. The majority of the church doesn't deal with this struggle at all, trying to choose, am I going to terminate this or not? Some of us do, and I think we're dealing with it on a great scale in society. And this is the reason I chose to talk about it, is because I think we need to be knowledgeable about it and see what we're dealing with in culture right now. This topic here was just to lead us into the hotter topic of this, and that was abortion. 1 to 1.5 million abortions take place every single year. 1 to 1.5 million abortions take place every single year. You could make the argument, I'm going to go ahead and get this one out of the way. You can make the argument that abortion should be legal based upon the fact of maybe incest or rape, something like that. 10 to 15 cases a year happen based upon those factors. So let's take 10 to 15 out of 1.5 million. How many are we still left with? Okay, so we're not, the majority of people having these abortions aren't based upon that argument. So we are having people choose to abort and terminate the life of a child for whatever reason. It goes back to what Paul was talking about a minute ago. I'm not here to question the motives of all the women that have partaken in this or whatever. Sometimes it's because of the health of the woman. Let's go ahead and get that out there. Sometimes because of the health of the woman. A lot of times it's for convenience. Not wanted. It's in a bad part of their life. They don't have the money to support them. There's all kinds of factors that go into this decision. But regardless of the factors that go into this decision, the question is what we've been talking about. Is it right? As Christians, you have a legal right. We mentioned this last week. We're not talking about, even when we get into this capital punishment discussion, we're not talking about legal governmental rights. We're talking about rights as Christian followers. Do we have the right? Ethically, can we say that God condones and promotes this type of living? That's the question at hand. That's what we're trying to seek out here. So the question is in this, and I'll just go as far to say this. We read in Romans chapter 1 a few weeks back about certain actions that take place. Murder is included in that. And then at the very end of that chapter, it talks about those who condone such actions. This is where I think we need to be careful, because we could say the greater majority of the church does not struggle with the action of abortion. But would we condemn it? Do we condone it? Would we support it? That's where we need to be careful, because it says, these are worthy of death and those who support such things. We need to be careful with that. We need to be careful in what we condone and what we support and the stances we take as Christian people in society and culture. That's the topic at hand that we're trying to discuss right now. So how do we view human life? Is a baby not a baby until it is born? I tried to really think about that question. Is a baby not a person until it is born? If they're not, why in the world, just my personal experience, why in the world do we take so much pride in its growth while it's in the womb? If they're not living, why do they move? Why do they have a heartbeat? Why do they have lungs and they breathe? If they're not living, why in the world do they have these characteristics that help us as human beings out in the world? Why do they help us? Why do they have those that help them live? Just some questions for thought here. We're going to kind of just ballpark this. We'll get to some discussion here in a second. If a fetus isn't a human person, here's a good question. If a fetus isn't a human person, why is an individual who kills a pregnant woman charged with double homicide? Why are they charged with double homicide? I mean, that's legally, if they're not a person, the government says they're not a person, we have the rights, so then you're charged with double homicide. I'm like, yeah, that's not fair. That's not fair. What is the difference then? What is the difference in killing that child? I kill a pregnant woman, not seriously, I would never do that. But I kill a pregnant woman, I get charged with double homicide. But if that woman was on her way to the abortion clinic, she would face no consequences for killing that child. But I'm charged with their murder. It doesn't make any sense.
What determines that?
What determines what?
Whether the child is a child or a living being, something to throw away.
Yeah, I think people have their own ways of choosing, but if we decide that, if we see that a woman is pregnant and she has even if it's an embryo living in her body, I think it's a living being. Yeah, pretty much so.
For the argument of life, if we found even a microscopic amount of life on Mars,
Yeah.
that we have evidence in the womb.
Yeah.
The evidence we have in the womb, the amount of life that is there, if we found even a nano amount of that on Mars,
Yeah.
we'd be jumping up and down going, life on Mars.
Life on Mars.
But in the womb, with all of this evidence, it's
Yeah.
not life.
Right.
Until a woman is inconvenienced. I think what
Right.
would determine that for legality would be if she wanted it or not. If she
Right.
wanted it, it's murder. If she didn't want it, it would be homicide.
Right.
Well, the unfortunate thing is we also give more rights to small beach moms than we do children. And birds, and
Yeah.
things like that. And
Right. Yeah, you're right.
they have more rights and you can go get thrown in jail for killing somebody.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yes, sir.
We don't have to go to Mars. We can go use our own planet as an example for evolution. We have this
Yeah. We're trying to have our cake and eat it too, and a lot of times. Another question I had was this. This is a question that a person in a book I was reading actually posed. With these things in mind, why can a woman terminate a child she doesn't want with no consequence whatsoever, but fathers, sperm donors, those that choose to impregnate women and don't take any responsibility? You get a woman pregnant and then you say, I'm not going to have anything to do with it, but they're obligated to take responsibility and care and support for that child for 18 years, even though they didn't want it. A woman says, I don't want it, can terminate it, but a father says, I don't want it, is legally obligated to take care of them and support them for 18 years of their life. There's some more double standard here of, is it really because it's the woman's body and it's not the man's body? So there's a lot of different balances here, a lot of different arguments that take place upon this action of abortion. Although to me, logically, there's enough evidence, sufficient evidence to support the argument against this action. But I think we need to look at some scripture too upon this, and these scriptures actually back up the idea that we were looking at with eugenics as well. Scripture is clear on certain things. We actually agreed. We had this conversation last week. I asked, based upon this discussion we were going to have, is life given by God? Yes. Is everyone created equal? Yes. God has a hand in all of this. We said all of those people have rights. So then, based upon the agreement, basically in the whole entire room, based upon the agreement of all of that, we see that God is a part of the process, that the process starts in the womb. And to deny someone, we talked about that we do not have the right to take that person's life. So deny someone of that life to take that life because of potential difficulties, whether that be physical, financial, inconvenient, socially, whatever it is that right? Is it okay for us to deny that child that right to life? Even I thought about this, even in the result of a heinous action like incest or rape, when people would say, well, we don't want to bring that child, that evil spawn, into the world. Are dogs born evil? No. We train dogs to be evil. Are children born evil? No. We train them. They learn to be evil. Their children are not born evil at all. Children are not born with sin whatsoever. So we can attest to that even in the result of a heinous action like that, we do not deny that child its life because of its potential to be evil. Given the right home, someone that was impregnated by a serial killer, that child could turn out to be one of the most famous and well-known gospel preachers in the world if given the right reason, if given the right time. And people surrounded by them. So even in actions like that, we shouldn't deny a person. Jeremiah chapter 1, it talks about this. It speaks of God knowing him before he was formed. You knew me before you formed me. Basically insinuating here there was a plan for one. There was a plan for this person's life. And it was a divine creation. Jeremiah says, your hands formed me. So there was a divine creation that took place in this child's life. And so are we to say that God is forming this child, yet that child does not deserve to live? I want to go to Psalm 139 here. This is with same wording of Jeremiah chapter 1. But we know this passage very well. But I want us to look at if you've read the entire chapter of Psalm 139, you see David here, and this is a praise here of God and almost a plea in some way, but it's like, oh Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down. You know when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, oh Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in, behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I can take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb, and I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance, and in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent, and your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred, and I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Man, these are beautiful words penned by David. But they speak to the divinity of God and the complexity of God's creation, even in forming a child in a mother's womb. Even before there was substance, you knew me. You knew the days that I was going to have. You knew who I was going to be, and you were forming me even before I was really formed. So to say that we wait on a certain time to be living, or a child has to be birthed to be living, man, we totally disregard the greatness of who God is. And to hear David say those words is sufficient evidence for me. I think there's something else here that we're going to look at. We know the story in Luke chapter 1 when both Mary and Elizabeth are pregnant, and Mary comes into the presence of her friend, and what happens with John? What happens with him? He leaps. Man, how awesome is that somebody that's not a person can leap? But that baby knew that he was in the presence of the Lord. How awesome is it that even God's creation, even inside the body of a woman, knew when the presence of the Lord was in his place. Awesome evidence there. Yes, ma'am. Yes. There you go. Mm-hmm. Totally agree with you there, that the baby leapt in the womb. I think that's just awesome. So these are some pieces of evidence here. We could go to more and more and more. I actually purposely omitted the "you shall not murder" verses here, because I think that's the argument a lot of times we try to make is murder is wrong. We know murder is wrong, but that's the argument we try to make about abortion and things like that. But it's looking at how intricate a child is, even before there's actually substance in the womb, knowing the work of God that's going on. Knowing that, we shouldn't even get to the conversation that it's murder. And so those are the things that I chose to share with you tonight. There is great work and great wonder on the part of God that comes from the blessing of a child. All of his creation, whether young, old, what we talked about, normal, abnormal, all are his creation, all been created in his image, and all have the right to life. Every single individual has the right to life, to live, to have the opportunity to know God, to have a relationship with him, to repent, and to become a child of his. So, cliffhanger for you. Tune in next week, and we'll get into the conversation you all really wanted to have, I know. Next week, we will end our class, this class on ethics, we will end it with the discussion of capital punishment. I'll just go ahead and say this before we leave. In my haste to make a point last week, I think I was misunderstood. So please come back. We're going to have a gentle, loving Christian conversation about this. I think I was misunderstood on this, but let me say this before we go. Last week was very discouraging and heart-wrenching for me. What I witnessed as a result of disagreement was this. I actually said this throughout the entire class. We can agree, we can agree, we can agree, we can agree, but when it hits home, when it impacts you in your life or maybe a family member, that's when you start to change. And that's when it's like, oh, we disagree, and then we put the gloves up, we put the wall up. Let me encourage us all not to do that. We have had great conversation, and I think we've been very understanding about certain things. And I found the pressure point last week. I'm just going to say that. I found the pressure point of the audience last week. Let's continue to keep this in perspective of why we're here. We're seeking answers. We're trying to grow together. We're trying to decipher who we should be in this world as a society. And although we may disagree on certain things, let's not let our anger, let's not let the fact that we may disagree impact the relationship and even the reaction we have when we disagree. We talk about that when we talk about teaching denominational people all the time, about how when you reach a point where you're about to argue to stop the conversation, it was a good thing that we stopped last week's conversation, because y'all might have tarred and feathered me if we had 15 more minutes. But let's keep it in perspective here. We may not agree, but we're all still brothers and sisters in Christ. We're all still searching for the same home. We're all still trying to reach the same goal, and we need to try and seek the persona of Jesus and do this in truth and love. I can promise you I'll do the same thing. But let's keep it in perspective, because next week we'll get a little tough. It'll get a little difficult. But let's do that, if you don't mind. I'm not trying to shame you, but I'm just going to go ahead and personally attest to the fact that when I left last week, because it was the first moment I felt like in this class that I had a hearty disagreement from the masses, and the reaction told me so, very much so. The reaction basically was off with his head. So capital punishment was actually wanted last week for me, because I might have been in disagreement, might have been misunderstood. That's why we need to keep it in perspective, and I can assure you of that. So tune in next week, if you will, and let's bring all the stuff that you got with you, if you will. I've got all my stuff. You bring it with you, and I can assure you the conversation's going to go a different path than you think it will. I promise you, it'll go in a different direction than you think it will. So it's going to be like a cliffhanger in a movie. So you're going to be like, man, I didn't see that coming. So, yes, sir.
Before we get off the subject, without even stating the obvious too much, it seems like the only way we're going to turn this country around, according to what it said in Romans, because this government condones abortion. We got to eliminate it. Roe versus Wade. Then we can start turning this country around, because as long as we pursue this path, not we, but as long as this government pursues this path of abortion, this country is not going to see capitalism.
Right. And just piggybacking off of that to end the discussion tonight, it starts with us. No movement, no action, no culture change is going to happen unless we make it happen. So it starts with us individually, it starts with our families, it starts with our church, and moving out into the world. So this is what it's been all about. The Christian ethics class, this has been the purpose for that. It's for us to create a movement, a culture change, and bringing people back to God, because the lines have been blurred, and people don't know how to get back to God. People don't know who belongs to God anymore. And so we want to unblur the lines and make a distinct stand in this world for who we stand for, what we stand for, and change the direction of the world. Not even the country, but change the direction of the world and change them and turn them back to God. That's the whole purpose of this class. And I hope that's what you've got out of it. Not to just shame society, but to motivate us. This is about motivating the church. So let's keep that in mind as we close next week. You're dismissed. Y'all have a great week. We'll see you Sunday.